Hello everyone! So in this video we are going to learn how to make tiny pumpkins. So these little guys are maybe 3/4 of an inch tall by about 2 inches in diameter. Now this one pattern will make 3 of them. What you will need is your stem color. I've chosen kind of a greenish beigeish brown. Your pumpkin color, I've chosen orange, but I do wish I had some cream in my stash that I could make some cream colored pumpkins. Size US 5 circulars or double points. Tapestry needle for sewing it, scissors of course, and some stuffing. Now each of these can be made very easily from scrap yarn, so you by no means need a full skein in any weight. The way that we'll be constructing these is actually all at once. So what we'll do to start is to cast on, and I'm using a long tail cast on, 30 stitches. Now you want to make sure that you have a very long tail because you're going to use that to sew up later. So we will start by casting on 30 stitches. Alright, so I have 30 stitches. How I usually join in the round is that I knit one across and then I will join. That gives it a little bit more sturdiness along this edge and makes it less likely that you're going to accidentally twist your stitches before you join. It would be cool if we could make a Mobius pumpkin, however I think that would be much too difficult to show in a video. So I will knit to this first row and then show you how I join. And please forgive me, I'm normally a Portuguese knitter, so throwing may look just a titch weird. Now the needle size is going to be dependent on the thickness of yarn. I am using a rather thick worsted. It's not quite a heavy worsted, but it is thicker than some other worsteds that I've run into. It is thicker, for example, than a Knit Picks Bravo worsted, which is actually the yarn that I'm using for the stem color. So what you want to make sure is that you are ending up with a dense fabric, because you want to not have any stuffing peeking out. Alright, so this is the wrong side of my work, right? If I was knitting this flat, I'd turn around and purl. What I'm going to do instead, since I'm using magic loop, is to bring it to the middle, or give or take. It's not very important for this to be exactly in the middle, and create my loop. So now you see by knitting that first row, you have a little bit more denseness here at the bottom, so you can make sure that you aren't flipping any of your stitches around or otherwise twisting them, so that we're not going to end up with a nice tube. And that is all we're making. So that was row number 1. Once we join, right, and make sure you pull tight. Sometimes I will knit in the back loop of this first stitch just to give it a little bit more stiffness. This will be row number 2. We will finish that one here. And you can do this easily on double points too. I prefer magic loop. I'm not a fan of double point needles. I actually no longer own any double point needles. I think I have a couple stragglers hiding around somewhere that's in a vase for decoration. So your mileage may vary. But like I was saying, if you wanted to use a thinner yarn, you would use smaller needles. If you wanted to use a big bulky yarn and make a little bit larger of a pumpkin, by all means, just make sure that you are going up in needle size, otherwise you are probably going to hurt your hands quite a bit with big yarn on very tiny needles. The yarn is not cooperative. Alright, so we're almost to the end of row 2. And like I said before, we are actually going to knit all 3 pumpkins at one time. How we're going to do that is that we're going to continue this tube for 12 rows in total. And then I'm going to cut the yarn that I'm working with, leaving a very long tail, and work 1 row in waste yarn. I'm then going to rejoin in this main color and work another 12 rows, making sure that I leave a long tail on both sides because I'm going to need to use that later to sew up the pumpkin and to add in these nice bumps along the side here. And then I'm going to cut again, leaving a tail, work another row of waste yarn, join in the main color for a 3rd time, and work another 12 rows. At the end of that, we won't cast off. We are going to cut a long tail, pull that yarn all the way through all the loops, and then pull it off the needles. That way we can cinch both sides before using that yarn to make the divisions in the pumpkins. Okay, so I am going to knit another 10 rows since I'm on row 2 right now, and then I will check in again once I've gotten to row 12. Alright, so I now have 12 rows here in my main color yarn, and what I will do now is leave a long tail, probably 16 to 18 inches. It's not super important. Err on the side of giving you too much tail. We'll want to cut that and leave that tail hang. This is where pumpkin 1 is going to split off. So we are going to knit the next row in waste yarn, for which I'm really just using the stem color, if I can find the end of it. And you'll want to use something that isn't super fuzzy, that isn't going to stick to the other yarn too badly. So I'm using a slightly thinner yarn somewhat for that purpose. What you don't want to do is go to remove the waste yarn later and have it stick to your project. From experience, that will make your life a little bit difficult. So we are going to knit just 1 row here. And for these pumpkins, if you wanted to experiment with a stitch type, if it is textured, that would actually make a lovely pumpkin too. You could make the entire thing in seed stitch, you could make the entire thing in garter stitch. Just be aware that if you do use a garter stitch based texture stitch, in all likelihood, your pumpkin is going to be shorter. When you're knitting stockinette, the stitches are taller than what they are when you're knitting garter. So just keep that in mind. You want to knit until it's about 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches. But this is pretty flexible to modify if you wanted some very pretty patterned pumpkins, for example. Or maybe you wanted to do a 2-color pumpkin with a slip stitch pattern, so you have kind of a checkerboard. That would also be very cool. Okay, so we have gotten to the end of that waste yarn row. So we are going to cut our waste yarn. We don't really need to leave a tail there. And I like to tuck the waste yarn ends inside this little pocket so I don't accidentally pick them up when I'm trying to pick up yarn to knit with. So at this point, that is pumpkin A complete for the knitting part. At this point, we are going to retrieve our main color yarn and put our scissors away. And we are going to join in yarn A again, but again, you're going to be using this yarn to cinch up later, so you want to make sure that you have a nice, decent long tail. So another 16, 18 inches, somewhere around there. I have split my yarn, so let me fix that quick. This is my only complaint about this yarn that I'm working with for this stem. It is twisted a little bit and now it is splitty. Alright, so we'll join in our yarn, making sure we are not knitting from the tail. That would be embarrassing. And we are going to knit another 12 rows, add another strip of waste yarn, and then knit another 12 rows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue knitting, and I will check back in once I am done knitting the third pumpkin. So remember, 12 rows main color, cut your yarn, leave a nice long tail, knit 1 row in waste yarn. Join back in your first color, leaving a nice long tail, and knit 12 more rows. Cut, leaving a nice long tail, another row of waste yarn, cut, join in your main color for the third and final time, leaving a nice long tail, and knit another 12 rows. So I will check back in once I've gotten to that point. Alright, I am back, and as you can see I have 12 rows, waste row, 12 rows, waste row, and my last 12. So what we will do now, we'll take our long tail here, we're going to use a tapestry needle and go through all of these stitches and take them off the needle. What you don't want to do yet though is to draw them tight. That will make it more difficult to pick up these stitches off the waste thread later. So we will take our tail here and pull off all these stitches. Remember, being careful to not draw it tight yet. We will cinch it in later, but if we cinch it in right now, once we go to pick up these stitches down here, that is going to make our life a little bit difficult. Now the other side. Alright, so now we are fully off the needle. We are not quite done with the needles yet, but now we have all of our stitches accounted for here at the top, and we're going to start picking out this waste yarn. So very carefully, what you will do is start leg by leg, and that for some reason is pulling strangely. Leg by leg, pulling out this waste yarn. Now what you want to do is be careful because you are creating live stitches. See here? There. So right there is a live stitch, and we are creating a double row of live stitches on the top and bottom of 2 different pumpkins. So we want to be very careful, like this stitch here was pulled a little tight. So we will continue doing this very carefully. We don't want to pull too hard. Sometimes the yarn like this, the yarn types are a little too similar, so they are a little sticky. And we will continue picking out all these waste stitches. And you can see here that we have open stitch, open stitch, open stitch, open stitch, open stitch, open stitch. We will be using those later to cinch in just like we did up here. So I'm going to pick out the rest of these stitches and check back in once I have 3 loops of pumpkin. Okay, so what I have here now are 3 distinct loops that'll each become a pumpkin. So this one here was the first one that we knit, so it has a cast on edge. The rest of them have all these empty loops. So what we will do, and I am going to take this top one to show you, is we're going to take that second tail that we left and we are going to very carefully go around these few stitches here and pick those up. So let's find the tail here. And we are pulling the tail from this stitch, so we are going to start over here. Now generally if you're picking up stitches, you want to make sure that you're picking up from the same direction, right? Because you want the stitches to lay the same way. In this case, it doesn't really matter because we are going to cinch these tight anyway. So you pick them up however it makes you happy in life. I sometimes like to pick them up from the back like this. It seems it opens the stitch just a little bit better. And we are going to do that all the way around. Now you want to make sure that you're not pulling tight at first here either because we haven't secured that last stitch. And what you don't want to do is end up with a knotted mess from pulling a little too hard, a little too early until we can stabilize every single stitch here. And make sure that you are not unduly splitting any stitches. Alright, so now that we have all of our stitches picked up on this side, and we don't have any stragglers here in the middle, we are going to go ahead and cinch that side as tight as you can get it. So now you have something that looks like this. I like to go one over just because there tends to be a gap right there and close that off. Now you don't want to close off fully in here because you will be drawing stitches back through here later.
Power off.
I'm so sorry. My Bluetooth light is having a conniption. So we will tie off here. I like to use a double knot. And we have part of a pumpkin done. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of stuffing. You don't have to use anything super nice. This was, I think, from Joann's when they had a sale maybe 5 years ago at this point. I bought like 10 bags of this stuff, which is a lot. I don't ever recommend doing that, but I suppose it worked out. So we're going to take a clump of stuffing. We are going to push it in there, and it helps if you draw it up a little bit. Keep patting it down, draw it up a little bit more, scoosh that remainder down, and then pull it tight. Now you don't want this to be super firm because you are going to use this yarn to wrap around and internally to get the ridges of the pumpkin. So now we are going to take our tapestry needle again. And we are going to take it and go straight through that center and pull down tight. This squishes the pumpkin down, right? So we can start getting those nice edges. So now that we have it here, we're going to pull across down to here in the middle and pull tight. That's our first stitch. Then we're going to spin the pumpkin. We're going to go to the exact opposite and do the same thing again. So now we have a very sad looking scrunchie. We're going to rotate it 90 degrees, do that same move again, and go to the other side, stitch through the center, and pull tight. So now we basically have a 4-leaf clover. We're going to do that again, but now right in the middle of each lobe. And we start getting that pumpkin shape. So you will do that 8 times in total. And now we have all 8 lobes of our pumpkin done. Now if you left your tail outside like I did, you can drop your needle, pull it tight, and then tie it with the other tail. Sometimes neighbor's room, that gives a little bit more stability. There. So that is how you create the ridges of the pumpkin. These tails, what you'll do is draw them back up through, pull them through the top here, and then cut them off. So I'm going to do that quick off camera, and then I will show you how to make the stem. Okay, for the stem, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take my waste yarn here. So this waste yarn is the stem color, which is why I like to use it as the waste yarn. I feel that I get to reuse it just a little bit. This is going to be an I-cord, so you cast on 4 stitches for this I-cord. And then, now this is usually easier on a double point, but like I said, I am a magic loop kind of person. You will move it to the other side of the needle and knit, using your tail and pulling it tight from the other side. Once you complete your first row, you're going to move it again to the other side of the needle, and you are going to pull tight from the other side and knit across again. You can do this for as long as you want. I generally do 4 or 5 rows before I'm done with my I-cord. For this one, I think I'll do 4. So this is the 3rd row of the I-cord. Oops. And now for the 4th. You want to make sure for this first stitch that you are pulling across tight so that your stitches do wrap around to form that I-cord. And that is the last row. So for the last row, we are going to do the same cinching action as we did before. So I'm going to move it to the other side of the needle. I'm going to take my tapestry needle here, and I am going to go through all these stitches. I like going from the other side, from where the yarn's coming out from. See how it comes from the side, and I'm going to start threading through on the side. I find that it closes it off a little bit better when you're looking for cinching like that. So now we have our stem. We are going to take our stem and we are going to attach it to our pumpkin. So I like to take that end that we just finished. You push your needle and it will be stiff. You have a lot of yarn going in through here, through that middle, Now, when you push back through, you want to make sure that you're catching a stitch in between, otherwise you're just going to yank your stem right back out. We want to make sure on the top here that we are catching more of the stem as we come back through. And then we are going to push through, and see how I'm going through the stem again. One more time. And we're going to tie off on this side. And then I like to bury my yarn tails, so I'm going to push it through, come out the side, pull a little taut so it springs back in, and snip. And now you can't see where that end went. Now for this tail, what I like to do is take that needle, thread it, oops, go back through that top part of the stem, and then I thread it down the middle of the I-cord and out through the other side, just to bury that tail as well, so it doesn't come out if this were to be moved. Trim it here, and if you pull just a little on the stem, that tail is buried as well. So there you have it. That is how you make 3 tiny pumpkins all at once. There will be a photo tutorial as well on my website. It'll be on Payhip as well as on my Facebook group. The Facebook group is KixKat Designs Patterns. You can find a lot of free charts there. You can find some free patterns. And then on both Etsy and Payhip at KixKat Designs, you can find patterns. On Payhip, there are some free ones, but for the majority of them, they are paid. If you have any questions, please comment below. Thanks all. Bye.